Hi, and welcome to another episode of Emerald Isle Vacation Home Specialist. I am your host, Dennis Richkovsky. Some of you recognize me as the co-owner of Flip Flops Donuts, and some of you know me as your broker of real estate specializing in waterfront and water view properties along the Crystal Coast, especially in my town of residence, Emerald Isle, North Carolina. From my vantage point as both a small business owner and a real estate professional, vacationers are coming over the bridge to enjoy the weather and the water Emerald Isle and the Crystal Coast are rightly famous for. I've devoted many episodes to Emerald Isle, but I haven't spent much time on what is called the Crystal Coast. In this episode, I make amends and define and describe the Crystal Coast. Simply put, the Crystal Coast comprises the three barrier islands wholly contained in Carteret County. These barrier islands are also recognized by many as the southern Outer Banks. However we refer to them, the first of these, Core Banks, named after the Coree tribe, extends from Ocracoke Inlet at its northern tip to its southern terminus at Cape Lookout. Core Banks was a single island from the late 1800s until a 1933 hurricane cut an inlet through it. Inlets have opened and closed on this low, flat barrier island frequently. Currently, new and old drum inlets divide the island into South Core Banks, Middle Core Banks, and North Core Banks. A third inlet, Ophelia Inlet, came as a result of that 2005 hurricane. Core Banks once was home to Portsmouth, a substantial port at the north end of North Core Banks. Established in 1753, the town of Portsmouth functioned as a lightering port, where cargo from ocean-going vessels could be transferred to shallow draft vessels capable of traversing Pamlico and Core Sounds. Portsmouth grew to a peak population of 685 in 1860. Though small, Portsmouth was one of the most important ports of entry along the Atlantic coast for a century or more. The decline of Portsmouth was precipitated by three blows. The first was the shoaling over time of the waters around Portsmouth Harbor. Civil War was yet another blow, as many people fled to the mainland when Union soldiers came to occupy the Outer Banks. The final blow was the emergence of the railroad as the preferred method of transporting people and goods across the nation. All three contributed to the shipping industry abandoning Portsmouth and more residents abandoning Portsmouth in search of work and more fruitful opportunities on the mainland. Within 100 years, only 17 hardy residents remained on the island with limited supplies. The last two residents, Marion Babb and Elma Dixon, two elderly ladies who had lived in the village for decades, finally and reluctantly left the island in 1971. And the town has been deserted ever since. Because the island had no electricity, running water, or refrigeration, relocation was a reasonable option. Relocation also was the option of choice for the former residents of Shackelford Banks, the next elongated pearl of sand in the chain of southern Outer Banks. Shackelford Banks is approximately 8.5 miles long and is roughly a mile wide at its widest point. Shackelford Banks is bordered to the north by the Back Sound and Harker's Island, to the south by the Atlantic Ocean, to the east by Barden Inlet, and the west by Beaufort Inlet. By the mid-1800s, Shackelford Banks was home to a small community, a settlement known as Diamond City. Though it would be difficult to find visual evidence of it there today, Diamond City had roughly 500 full-time residents by the end of the 1800s. This island town, however, would not be for much longer. In August of 1899, a massive hurricane hit, the worst one the old folks could remember. There was water over everything, with just a few of the bigger sand hills sticking their tops out. Houses, those still on foundations, mostly looked like houseboats, surrounded by seawater. The ocean washed over the stones in the graveyards and uncovered the bones of the folks buried there. It killed most of the big trees and flooded the gardens with salt water and cut the beach down so low in spots that almost every high tide would come over. And it smashed up boats, blew down outhouses, and mocked up just about everything else in Diamond City. When it was over, some residents relocated to nearby Harker's Island. Others went to Morehead City and bought lots in a place called the Promised Land. And when the residents decided to move, they took all of Diamond City with them, except for the name and the family graveyards and foundations where their houses used to stand. In the end, both Portsmouth on Core Banks and Diamond City on Shackleford Banks practiced a sure way to avoid continued erosion and damage: relocation. This was a viable option for three reasons. First, neither community was very large. Second, inhabitants of both communities lived without electricity, running water, or refrigeration. And third, most homes could be relocated or abandoned relatively cheaply. In the 21st century, however, relocation is no longer a viable option for several reasons. First, in most coastal communities, structures designed to be taken up at the end of the season were knocked down and replaced by larger permanent housing units such as duplexes, condominiums, and McMansions. Second, there is human hubris. 100 years or so ago, humans were just beginning to think that they could out-engineer nature. We've come a long way, baby, as evinced by the North Carolina legislature recently outlawing climate change. The next barrier island we encounter in Carteret County is Bogue Banks. This barrier island defines the southern end of the North Carolina Outer Banks, and it provides perhaps the best example of reduced risk attributable to natural island characteristics among all of the Outer Bank islands. Indeed, more moderate to low risk sites are to be found here than on any other barrier island to its north or south. The natural characteristics of this island and their intended consequences have been discussed in detail on this channel. So there you have it, the Crystal Coast. It's comprised of 3 barrier islands, all within Carteret County. 2 are devoid of human occupation now, and the third, Bogue Banks, is home to Atlantic Beach, Salter Path, Indian Beach, and my town of Emerald Isle, North Carolina. Return next week to the same bat channel at the same bat time of 9 a.m. on Thursday for another episode of Emerald Isle Vacation Home Specialist.